I'm at a loss, kids. I'm sitting here typing up this script so I can start talking to you about Vomitoreum, which is a new Metroidvania-style shooter from developer Scumhead, and there's literally so much about it that deserves attention that I absolutely have no idea where to start. Vomitoreum is a game so compact, so concise, so focused, and yet so immensely full of ideas and visionary work that I've been sitting here marinating on the themes and environments and gameplay, and I feel a little gobsmacked. One of the easy ways to get at it from the get-go is the cheeky dad way, which would be to say that the game is basically From Software's Metroid Prime if it was on the NES. After all, the Dark Souls influence is everywhere, and the main character is basically the fallen angel version of Samus Aran. And when I started playing this game for the first half hour or so, that is what I kept coming back to. But as I went deeper, so too did the game, deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole, tumbling and screaming silently as I plunged further, raging against a dying world that perhaps did not deserve redemption. Oh man, God, okay, this game, kids, this game did things to me. I guess if we're gonna start anywhere, we ought to start at the beginning. The opening cutscene drops some heavy lore in a traditional Dark Souls way, providing lots of information while being as obtuse as possible. Seems that a giant horn named Vomitoreum dropped down out of the sky once upon a time and began infecting the world with some kind of twisted disease in the form of a dense fog, which transformed men into monsters. There were three factions that stood against the horn: the warriors, led by the great knight named Untitled, the Masons, who cast life spells to battle the sickness, and the demon whores of Concubath, who devoured the infection. Alright, first off, kids, as a self-professed feminist, I recognize that the words whore and prostitute are demeaning, derogatory, and designed to slut-shame women who have agency over their own bodies, and that may or may not involve making money off of their looks. It's properly called sex work, but, well, for the purposes of this video, seeing as how Vomitoreum uses very high fantasy terms and settings mixed with darker blasphemous themes, the usage of the word whore gets a pass in this regard, and the women of Concubath actually have quite a bit of agency. But otherwise, remember kids, sex work is work. It's not called a blow job for nothing. Alright, so the warriors, the Masons, and Concubath. Untitled used the Seraphim, the Sword of Life, to battle Vomitoreum. Between these three groups, they managed to push the horn back into the sky, but 1 year later it returned with even worse disease to spread. By this point, everyone seemed tired of dealing with the whole thing, so Untitled retreated into his cathedral fortress, Concubath decided to float above ground in her airship with her remaining women, and the Masons took up the mantle as the people willing to deal with saving the world. And that's where you come in. You're the Nephilim, the final creation of the last of the Masons, designed specifically to be able to withstand the horrors and diseases of the world in order to face down Vomitoreum. The last Mason is your introduction to the world and gives you pointers and objectives throughout the game. Your task is to find a way to turn away Vomitoreum, a task which involves you finding a woman named Eve on the Concubath airship, and also taking the Seraphim sword that belongs to Untitled. Once you've accomplished these goals, it's on to the terrifying Vomitoreum. Saying that there's a lot going on here is a big fucking understatement. The story here isn't so much a detailed plot, so much as it's a series of sparse information drops that provide you with just enough detail to give you more to understand, but also imply more than they explain. Every single morsel dropped is a tiny crumb of a larger plate that is constantly, tantalizingly out of reach, crafting a deep realm of mystery about the goings-on which never quite reveal themselves fully. Sure, near the end game there's an intense twist reveal that calls into question a lot of the lore we've been presented with up until then, and the ending doubles down on the nihilistic atmosphere, right up until the finale where it almost seems like we're going to get a happy ending. Or does it? I can't say more without going into spoilers, but the themes of the narrative deal with hope, loss, despair, rape, wrath, justice, vengeance, and morally gray decisions made in the interest of the greater good. Vomitoreum's world is one of decay, a shadow of the former place it used to be, as evidenced by some artifacts left over from the before times. There are no humans here any longer, only monsters and creatures which have somehow survived the infection. Violence is the natural response to any threat made, to the extent that anytime I came across something that didn't immediately attack me, it felt foreign, alien, and judgmental. As the Nephilim, and as a player, traversing through the world of Vomitoreum was like I was trespassing somewhere ancient and eldritch, where I was not only not welcome, but also thoroughly did not belong. And where violence is the response to the Nephilim also has the ability to turn that response back at their attackers. Starting off with a Colt Pistol, one thing that is curiously evident is that there is no ammunition in the game. You heard me right, kids. From the Colt Pistol, to the trench gun, to the sawed-off, to the machine gun, there are no ammo pickups and no ammo counters. Fire away to your little heart's content. At first, you kids might be thinking that this takes away any kind of engagement for the game, because after all, if you have unlimited ammo, then it's just a matter of time to kill anything in your way, and you don't have to deal with resource management or think about it too much, right? Well, you'd be wrong. Sure, unlimited ammo makes it a little easier to deal with enemy encounters, and as you journey through the world, enemy encounters become more and more frequent, with more and more resilient enemies. Your arsenal becomes less of offensive weaponry and more of a tool, particularly in the bunker gauntlet given to you early in the game, which is designed to break specific blocks that impede progress. And the weapons also have alt-fire modifications that you find along the way, such as the sawed-off's Crimson Fire, which launches a modestly powerful shot that homes in on enemies, which is useful during hectic combat, and the Colt Pistol gets a freeze shot upgrade, which lets you make blocks of ice on top of petrifying water that would freeze you if you dipped into it. It's an interesting concept and conceit that these weapons are utilized as tools rather than mechanics, particularly in a world so full of violence that a lack of violence feels alien. It also calls into question the nature of the Nephilim's existence. Are they a tool of creation to help heal the world? Or is their purpose of healing made only through being a tool of violence? At one point in the game, we learn that the Nephilim was created by the ashes of thousands of humans, an act that the last Mason admittedly refers to as monstrous and irredeemable. So then, when a creation of violence is tasked with the act of violence in the pursuit of rebirth, how then can the rebirth of the world be anything other than another act of violence? Questions like these arise naturally out of the narrative as implications rather than outright statements, and as I learned more about the nature of the world and how things came to be, I questioned whether or not I ought to be saving this world, and instead should maybe just let everything die. I want to pause here for a moment to admire the visuals in the game. I've never seen anything like this in a video game before. Sprawling, weird, disgusting. The art style is inspired by the Polish artist Zdzisław Beksinski, whose art was abstract, gothic, expressionistic, full of impossibly proportioned human bodies in monstrous forms. Given that, it absolutely makes sense how Scumhead took inspiration from that art to breathe life into their twisted world. Faces and body imagery are everywhere, from doors to hallways to the rocks in the ground. At one point, I found a mouth embedded into a cliff and a river of bodies continually poured out of it. Imagery involving crucifixes and bodies that have been crucified dot the landscape, which only adds to the feeling of isolation and unwelcomeness. Oppressive is the most fitting descriptor here. Regardless of the enemies you face along the way, the environment itself is barren, alien, and feels alive all on its own. Adding to this factor is the game's soundtrack, which is mostly comprised of droning, ambient soundscapes that feel as though the world around is stretching and groaning. During some boss battles, there will be fast-paced, epic, orchestrated tracks that play as a means to enhance the intimidation factor, while some bosses feature unnerving music box tunes that quietly play on as you battle, feeling less like a high fantasy duel to the death and more like a child's fantasy gone horribly wrong. There are a few places where there are actual musical tracks during 3 specific cutscenes. One at the beginning, one in the middle, and one at the end. My nerves were on edge during 90% of the playthrough, due in part to the score. Here, have a listen. Speaking of enemies, the variety here is welcome, and are strategically placed throughout the world. Remnants of Uma Dermadine's warriors crisscross everywhere, armed with everything from guns to swords to flamethrowers. Other creatures roam about as well, twisted, sickly things that should never be taken for granted. While I never felt like I had too much trouble with the common enemies on the whole, there were certainly rooms where their chest placement was maddeningly brilliant and intense. Part of this is due to the save system, where calcified masons are left standing in rooms all across the map. Find one, activate its bell, and you save your game. Since you can't save anywhere, firefights can get tricky when you've been marching across the world for a good 10-15 minutes, and suddenly you're surrounded by flame-throwing bastards who really fucking hurt, and in the back of your head you're sweating and wondering just how far back your last save was. Fortunately, I only had 1 or 2 instances where I got royally screwed and ended up having to do a bit of backtracking. But these moments were more my fault than anything, so the save system felt fair and forgiving and never made me feel frustrated. And that's a really good thing, because by the end of the game, you're facing down large enemies in large numbers, who are sometimes more intimidating simply because of their appearance more than their damage output. In true Metroidvania Souls-like fashion, careful exploration yields rewards that upgrade the Nephilim from a modest combatant into walking death. One of the true joys of Vomitoreum is the upgrade system. It feels careful, deliberate, and intentional. Obstacles appear which seem insurmountable, but then 10 minutes later you found an item that changes your ability to get around the world significantly. There's the dash boots, which let you dash forward Doomslayer style. There's the fetal soul, which allows you to curl up into a ball like Samus's morph ball and access narrow halls. There's a double jump, and the aforementioned weapon alt-fire upgrades. We also get Metroid-style health tanks, which increase the Nephilim's max HP by 100 points with each one. These are everywhere if you're looking properly. And I was. So by the time the final bosses rolled around, I was sporting 700 HP and feeling pretty unstoppable. That wasn't enough to keep me alive, by the way, as the bosses will hit you, and hit you hard. So fortunately, I had the embryonic batteries as a backup. The batteries will refill 1 full health tank with each use, so keep a weather eye out for them as you're going to fucking need them for the boss fights. Fortunately, if you're running low on health or battery power, a visit to one of the save masons will refill your resources. And Christ, the boss fights. Depending on how much preparation you do and how much exploration you do, you'll either find yourself well equipped or totally screwed when the bosses inevitably appear. Massive, intimidating, each with unique names and health bars and attacks that will burn themselves into your brain long after you've beaten them. I didn't have an incredibly difficult time beating them. After all, I did my adventuring and upgraded as much as I could find. But still, these fights, despite being mostly circle, strafe, fire until they're dead encounters, keep you on the edge of your seat because when they hit you, they hit harder than anything else. I had a couple of times where I couldn't keep up with battery usage because I'd use one and immediately get hit and lose an entire bar or two. The most difficult battle comes early on with a pair of demon horde twins in a gladiator arena. And let me tell you, I was sweating by the end of that one. I think I had to run that gamut 3 or 4 times because they were just that difficult to duck and dodge. This shit gets intense, but victory is satisfying, especially if you can find the 10 homunculi scattered about the world. Each little homunculus is cute and precious and perfect in every way, and if you find all of them and return them to their owner, there's a powerful surprise waiting for you that'll make the endgame practically a breeze. And that, again, is what makes a successful Metroidvania in my opinion. Upgrading, backtracking, opening up new areas, discovering new weapons, collecting all the items necessary to slowly and competently transform into an avatar of death. I felt nearly unstoppable, which also felt a little wrong. After all, with the ethical questions of using violence as a means to bring about rebirth and redemption, is becoming such an unstoppable badass really, truly a means to aspire to? I'm gonna do a thing that I haven't done in one of my videos yet, and I'm gonna talk some spoilers. This is your chance to nope out of this part if you want to keep some surprises to yourself. So head to this timestamp if you want to avoid such things. Alright? Okay, kids? This is your last chance to leave the room before the adults start talking. Alright, if you're here for this. There's a point in which you're ready to go find Eve on the Concubath airship, but you need the key to the airship to get up there. And by this point, I'd found the acid suit, which lets you submerge in petrifying water and survive. So I went back to the arena where I defeated the Horde twins, and went down into the water to see if I could find the key there. After all, the key is for the Concubath airship. Maybe the twins were guarding it, right? Well, to my surprise, I ended up in an underground area off the map. literally, going further and further down into silent darkness, lit up only by my little lamp homunculus. This is the most terrifying part of the game. Fumbling through the darkness, I ended up discovering an abandoned metro station, which led further underground into a red hellscape and was forced to drop down a deep hole. Here I met Eve, where she revealed that she had been an orphan, abused and abandoned for being horribly disfigured and living in the metro station for a long time before Dermadine had discovered her, and then he violated her. In her anguish, she prayed to God and something answered. An angel named Vomitoreum. The angel promised her that the world would suffer for how it had treated her, and so Eve's wrath gathered up and Vomitoreum breathed the diseased fog over the world. But the angel also promised her that she would be reborn a queen of angels, creating some kind of fatal version of Eve. She felt joy as she watched mankind twist and rot into the monsters now plaguing the earth, before her former body twisted itself into Eve's monument, the source of the infection. Fast forward, I get to the airship. I find the fetus of the new Eve after defeating Concubath herself, and I go to Dermadine. He doesn't even try to deny his sins. He admits them freely and says he feels sick of living, of knowing that his actions are what caused the plague. So after defeating him in combat, he says to take the Seraphim blade and kill him, as the sword is bound to his soul. With the tools needed to face Vomitoreum, we leave and find a peaceful, tranquil landscape, and the angel Vomitoreum resting beneath a tree. Vomitoreum implies that the Nephilim has settled this battle countless times, implying that we've done this before, and the fight commences. Once beaten, Vomitoreum relents and asks for the fetus of Eve, fulfilling its promise to transform her into a queen of angels. He tells her that her wrath is complete, and says to her, "Let's get it right this time," before he removes the infection from the world. Earth is reborn, flowers and grass bloom, and Eve rises, born into a new body of beauty, and she and the Nephilim look out over the new world and to the future. What's so interesting and honestly impressive about this ending is that at no point does the game place the weight of the fault over on Eve or on her desire for vengeance and punishment. Everyone, including Dermadine, understands that it was the sin of the night violating the innocent that led to Vomitoreum's plague, and the implied notion that somehow this dance has been done multiple times by the Nephilim, resetting the world only for the sins and violence of humanity to bring it back down again, is bleak and nihilistic at best. I genuinely don't know if this can be considered a good ending, knowing that somehow man will fall under the weight of their sins eventually, and the world will once more be plunged into death and chaos and destruction. But at least for Eve, the victim of this story, she has had her wrath satisfied, her attackers and abusers punished, and now into a fresh new world she can emerge into a Garden of Eden and begin again untouched. Vomitoreum is a game that I am, after all of this, hard-pressed to find any criticism of. Sure, it's kind of my job to sit around and play these games and enjoy them, and then step back and offer a critical perspective on them to be fair and even. But at the same time, I'm genuinely at a loss for what to say about this wonderful, enveloping shooter. One could say that the brevity of the game is a downside. And sure, my playthrough clocked in at just over 3.5 hours. But the game is so focused, so concise, all killer and no filler, that 3+ hour game time felt like I had just absorbed a game twice its length. And noting that, my endgame stats showed I only got 99% of total kills possible and only found 82% of the secrets. There's room for me to explore even more and get a deeper, longer playthrough. But even with that note, there's also room for speedruns, and runs where the task would be to pick up as few upgrades and weapons as possible and still beat the game. I'm genuinely interested in maybe doing a stream where I avoid half of the health tanks and batteries and outright ignore every weapon except the trench gun. I think the machine gun might be one you're forced to pick up, but still, the idea of ramping up the difficulty intentionally by not going out of my way to upgrade the Nephilim is tantalizing. At a $10 price point, especially in support of an indie developer, this is absolutely a steal. I had one or two minor issues that popped up, most notably that there were a couple of instances where I would visit the save mason and my tanks and batteries didn't refill. I'm not sure if that was an intentional thing, that maybe I have to visit a different mason between each refill in order to continually top everything up, or if it was just a glitch. And also, while the freeze gun modification for the Colt Pistol was neat for crossing a long stretch of water, the number of times I actually needed to use it was minimal. But other than these minor bits, that was it. I'm at a loss to say anything critical about this game beyond that aspect. Vomitoreum went through a successful Kickstarter and is currently in full release on Steam for the aforementioned $10. This game is pure art, handcrafted, lovingly made, and presented as is with all the skill of a seasoned pro. Halfway through this journey, I was already yearning for a Vomitoreum 2. But at the end of the day, this game is a masterpiece that stands tall amongst a sea of retro shooters, confident in execution and presentation, and it needs nor requires a sequel of any kind. Vomitoreum is a strong contender for my favorite game of the year, and it scores a 10 out of 10. Kids, I hope you give this game a try. I haven't had an experience like this in years, and again, at only $10, I can't believe this game isn't already lighting up the internet. Scumhead has truly dropped something special into our laps, and while I haven't played any of their other free-to-play shooters yet, I've got it in mind to go do so now. Thanks again for stopping by. Make sure you grab a handful of cookies on your way out the door, but don't tell Mom I let you or she won't buy any more at the grocery store. I'll see you next time.